When we talk about sustainability, and this is regardless of the industry in question, we're talking about two major categories of impact: the planet and its people. And while the words sustainable and sustainability have, they've been kind of ruined, or at least, we view them with a lot more skepticism now. Because they've been used in approximately 9 gazillion greenwashing campaigns by brands like, Nike and Zara, H&M, and yes, even Shein. Still, sustainable and sustainability, they are still both words that have meaning. Now, obviously, as a person who writes epic Instagram captions and sits down almost every week to write a 20+ page script for an episode of this podcast, well, obviously, I do think words are super powerful. And sustainable itself is a very powerful word. It means essentially something that can be maintained over the long term without causing harm or using up resources. Those are big things, right? In 1987, the UN World Commission on Environment and Development defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I love that because it's not just about protecting ourselves. It's not just about thinking about the here and now. It's about the future. It's about the people who are just being born or will be born someday in the future. It's about billions of people that we will never meet, but they still matter to us. Yes, we're taking care of the planet and its people now, but we're also caring for the future. And when I dig into so-called sustainable or conscious claims and products, I'm also viewing them through the lens of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We used to talk about them a lot in the early days of Clotheshorse, but I think it's time for a revisit. I'm not going to go too deeply into them, but the UN has a great website that really breaks them down into an easy to understand format, and I'll share that in the show notes, and I would urge you to go take a look at it because this is the filter through which I process claims from any brand or business. And when one of you sends me a post or a web page from a brand and asks me if it's greenwashing, this is what I use to make my determination, if you will. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals were created in 2015, and while there are 17 individual goals, they can pretty easily be separated into two categories: planet or people. Under the planet umbrella, we find responsible consumption and production, which is using resources wisely and sustainably. I mean, it's hard to see how fast fashion could ever be sustainable when we know that so many resources are wasted by the industry. After all, about 30% of the clothes the industry creates every year are never, ever sold, and most head to the landfill or the incinerator. And furthermore, fast fashion is a business model that relies on the overconsumption of its customers to make the math. So right away, fast fashion does not fit into the Sustainable Development Goals. Climate action, that's another one. Taking urgent action to combat climate change. This includes strong regulations forcing companies to reduce their carbon emissions considerably. And that would include all of the fast fashion brands who are shipping all of their orders around the world. I hate this so much, via airplanes. So here again, not really aligning with the UN's sort of definition of sustainability. Life below water, that's Sustainable Development Goal 14. That's protecting the ocean, seas, and marine life. And this would include removing plastic pollution from the oceans. And we know that the synthetic fabrics of the fast fashion industry are a big contributor to the global plastic pollution crisis. Some data has indicated that 35% of the microplastics in the ocean are directly derived from wearing and washing synthetic clothing. We know about 65% of clothing made every year is made of polyester and other synthetic fibers. Shein specifically, after all, this is part 3 in a series about Shein. Shein uses more polyester than H&M and Zara. There's a great Bloomberg report from last year that goes into the details here. It'll be in the show notes, of course. The data around how much polyester, cotton, etc. that each brand is using is actually publicly available on their websites. It's not hidden, right? Bloomberg kind of pulled it all together, but it's out there for us. Shein says it's using about 64% polyester and 19% other. I'm guessing these are materials like nylon, also synthetic, also plastic, and PU, aka vegan leather, also synthetic, also plastic. Meanwhile, about 24% of Zara's fabric use as of last year was polyester, and H&M's polyester use was about 21%. None of these numbers are great because both brands invented the fast fashion model of overconsumption and overproduction. And there is, I say this all the time, it's so true, there is no fabric that allows us to overconsume and overproduce without repercussion. But it is interesting to see how both brands have, to a pretty decent extent, moved away from polyester as an ostensible move towards more, sustainability. But once again, Shein's still going hard into polyester. And I read this piece on LinkedIn recently. I'm not going to share it with you all because I felt it was more opinion than hard data, although the source of this piece did feel reliable, basically someone who's like an analyst into fossil fuel use around the world. And he was talking about how fossil fuel consumption in China has just blown up over the past few years. And there's no clear line between that and like cars, transportation, air travel, heating and cooling at all. His belief is that exponential growth in fossil fuel consumption is coming from the production of synthetic fabrics, which all require fossil fuels to create. I thought that was really fascinating. Once again, I'm not going to share that one in the show notes because I'm just not convinced because I don't see the data, but I do believe it, if that makes sense. I just take this stuff really seriously in terms of like what I would share with you versus what I don't. But I wanted to mention that because I've been turning it over in my mind for months now, trying to figure out how I could find hard data. I haven't yet, but I promise I'm working on it. Anyway, so that's another sustainable development goal that Shein and just fast fashion as a whole isn't really supporting, right? Which is the protection of our oceans and rivers, all the water around the world. Another sustainable development goal, we've already talked about life below water. Now we're going to talk about life on land, and that's protecting ecosystems, forests, and biodiversity. And believe it or not, this is also an area where fast fashion proves how unsustainable it is via its high volume use of man-made cellulosic fabrics, aka rayon, viscose, lyocell, and modal. All of these are made from tree pulp, including pine, beech, eucalyptus, and bamboo. There is a direct link between fast fashion's ever-growing use of these fabrics and deforestation around the globe. Real talk, cutting down forests in order to make clothing is just not sustainable. On top of that, in 2021, 100 different brands, including Nike, Zara, H&M, and Adidas, were linked to Amazon deforestation in a report by Stand.Earth. The supply chains of these brands included the largest Brazilian leather exporter, JBS, and JBS is known to engage in widespread deforestation in order to create cattle grazing land. Those cattle are then slaughtered for leather, and the demand for leather is so high. Reports have speculated that more than 400 million cattle need to be slaughtered every year to meet the global demand for leather bags and shoes. No matter where you stand on the issue of leather, you have to agree that cutting down forests in order to ultimately make and sell more bags and shoes, along with viscose clothing, is just nightmare fodder for those of us who are worrying about an ever-warming planet. And by the way, JBS, once again, Brazil's largest leather exporter, it promises to reduce its deforestation, but not until 2035, which is, way too long from now. Like, what forests will be left by 2035? And how just sad is it that we're cutting down epic numbers of trees to make clothing and bags and shoes? It's devastating to me. So yeah, from the planet side of sustainability, it's really, really easy to see how fast fashion is just not sustainable at all. Now, the rest of the UN Sustainable Development Goals are focused on people. And once again, we can see a direct correlation to fast fashion, or more accurately, why fast fashion is not sustainable. We find things like gender equality, quality education, access to clean water, peace and justice, sustainable cities, and, no poverty, decent work and economic growth, reduced inequality. That's reducing the gap between the rich and poor. We see zero hunger. This one not only addresses global hunger, but also implements sustainable farming practices as the norm, not the exception as it often is now. And all of these, no poverty, decent work, reduced inequality, zero hunger, all of these tie closely to an industry, aka the fashion industry, that is notorious for underpaying all of the people making, shipping, and selling its clothing, for keeping both garment workers and retail workers in poverty. And of course, there is hunger associated with fast fashion when people aren't making a living wage. Another sustainable development goal, it's number 6, is good health and well-being. This is all about making sure everyone can live a healthy life, including access to good medical care. Once again, we know that just about everyone making, shipping, and selling those clothes, they don't have access to good, affordable healthcare, whether they live here in the US or Canada or overseas. Basically, the Sustainable Development Goals are a roadmap to making life better for people on planet Earth now and for generations down the road. And it's all about intersectionality, recognizing that social justice and environmentalism overlap in about 1 million different ways. If we're going to save this planet, we have to care for its people. And we have to recognize that climate change, plastic pollution, water pollution, all of that, the most marginalized and poorest people on our planet, they will bear the brunt of these disasters. And to me, that's where we can say planet plus people and say really, it's ultimately just people. We're protecting people. Yes, this is about animals and plants too, but we're protecting people when we dismantle a system like fast fashion, an industry, a system that impacts every human on this planet, no matter where they live, how much money they have, or how much they care about clothing. And while I share lots of statistics about the environmental impact of fast fashion, and in this series in particular, Shein, I'm really talking about the impact on people. You, me, and everyone we know, and everyone we don't know. And that's where this gets kind of sticky, because it feels virtually impossible to have a nuanced, productive conversation about Shein anywhere on the internet. On one hand, we have people who say, fuck you if you shop at Shein. Yeah, guys, I really do see when you share one of my posts on Instagram stories and add that commentary or something similar. If you haven't listened to my episodes about how to talk to others about fast fashion yet, well, spoiler alert, that approach does not work. It just makes people either guilty, ashamed, or angry at you. And it doesn't get anyone to rethink their relationship with Shein. On the other hand, we have people who are like, fuck you for saying something negative about Shein, followed by all kinds of bad faith arguments like, all companies are just as bad as Shein. And I would argue, as would lots of scientists and researchers working within the fast fashion and environmental space, that actually Shein is worse because it operates largely unchecked at a vast, ever-expanding, and ever-accelerating scale. I also see these bad faith arguments, the classics, like, you're classist for talking about Shein. You're fatphobic for talking about Shein. You're ableist for talking about Shein. The thing about all of these statements is, well, accepting those as truth is a problem. Saying something like, you're right, it is fatphobic to talk about Shein, is legitimizing a few things that are just not true. First off, that no one should cast a critical eye on Shein because it is a system engaged in the public good. That Shein is making this world such a better place that you would be a really selfish asshole to say something about its actual negative impact on our world. And next, that Shein is making great clothes in larger sizes. I can agree that yes, Shein is doing a better job of offering options in a wider range of sizes because they are literally the only brand doing this in a major way. And you know what? It makes me super angry that the fashion industry continues to ignore this pretty major group of people. Not because those people don't want and need cute clothes, but because the industry can't put its own fatphobic culture aside and, make clothes in more sizes. That doesn't make Shein a hero. The sizing is all over the place. One Reddit comment said that Shein's plus sizes run about 2 sizes too small. Furthermore, these clothes are low quality and often synthetic and short-lived fabrics. So I wouldn't say that Shein is a system worth upholding because they are dressing larger people. No, like everyone deserves better than this. Many things can be true at one time, and that is why this stuff is so complicated, right? Shein can be more affordable, right? And it can be all you feel like you can afford. It can be the only brand making clothes in your aesthetic and your size. It can also, at the same time, be terrible for the planet and its people. And that's why we have to have these larger conversations and really think about it all. And think about what we're going to do next, right? Lastly, if you're going to say it is fatphobic to talk about Shein, just let people buy whatever they want from Shein, it would mean saying, even without saying this explicitly, that the global North's need for lots of inexpensive clothing in a wider size range is far more important than, the human rights of the humans making the clothing. The humans that are dealing with the brunt of the environmental impact of climate change and plastic pollution and water pollution. And I know that no one thinks that, but that's kind of the mental gymnastics we're expected to perform here. And that's where it's time for all of us, no matter where we stand on the issue of fast fashion and Shein, to take a deep breath and consider the bigger picture here. So let's do it. Deep inhale, long exhale. I've mentioned this before, but I'll tell you again. I've been making Clothes Horse for almost 4 years now. Well, actually 4 years now. More than 200 episodes, countless social media posts, conversations all over the internet, and I still have random acquaintances say, hey, I finally listened to an episode of Clothes Horse, and it's really well done. You have an aptitude for this. So why aren't you covering something more important than clothes? By now, I just roll my eyes and I move on from statements like that. But in the beginning, it really bothered me because I know that fast fashion is really just a case study in all of the overlapping issues our world faces right now. Climate change, plastic pollution, water pollution, overuse of fossil fuels, anti-fat bias, gender inequality, racism, all the bad isms and phobias, mental health, and of course, poverty, low-wage jobs, hunger, lack of access to healthcare and good food and education and so on, right? It's all intersecting here with fast fashion. And I want to give you an example of all of that playing out, if you don't believe me, how fast fashion relies on us being poor and keeps us poor, right? First things first, many of us are struggling financially, feeling like we are this close to losing what we have, if we have anything at all. And it's thanks to a few things: rising costs in housing and food, student loan debt, here in the US, unaffordable healthcare, where we literally worry about how one illness will bankrupt us. And of course, there's stagnating wages. In fact, those wages are a big piece of the fast fashion puzzle. Back in 2020, the Center for Economic and Policy Research found that the minimum wage here in the US would be $21.50 if it had kept up with inflation since the 1970s. We would probably be at more like $22 now due to inflation over the last few years since that study was completed. Yet here in the US, the minimum wage remains at $7.25 an hour. This means that people making the minimum wage, or even a few dollars more, cannot afford to live. I've talked in the past about MIT's living wage calculator. I'll share the link again. It's kind of fun to play around with. Well, according to that living wage calculator, a single person with 0 children living in Lancaster County, where I live right now, would need to make $22.04 per hour and work 40 hours each week in order to make a living wage. Obviously, that number increases for people living in large urban areas or places with a higher cost of living, or people who have children or providing care for other people in their family. Now, you might say, well, I don't have a minimum wage job, so what does that have to do with me? Because here's the thing. When the bottom of the wage range moves up, all salaries move up. So no matter where you are on that ladder, your wages increase. Well, unless you're an executive of one of those big companies, because then you are already getting a massive raise every year that far outpaced inflation. In fact, top earners are making more money than they were in the 60s and 70s when adjusted for inflation. So now we know many of us are underpaid, and the rich are getting richer. We still feel that pressure to wear new clothes, look good, fit in, adhere to dress codes, whether explicit like at work or implied, socially. So we have to buy a lot of new clothes, but we're all underpaid. So we can only afford fast fashion, maybe specifically Shein. And here's the thing about fast fashion. It doesn't work as a business model if people are paid well and treated well. And that includes you, the customer, because fast fashion doesn't sell if people are feeling financially secure and happy. A lot of the underpaid people in this world are working directly or indirectly within the fashion industry. Obviously, there are garment workers, and we know that the people making our clothing and the fabrics, the trims, etc., are paid their country's minimum wage at best, which is not a living wage. And this is where we get a lot of arguments like, well, it's different over there, or things cost less there, or, well, I'm underpaid too, so... But all of those things are not true. Well, yeah, it is probably true that you are underpaid, but things are not different over there. People still need food, healthcare, education, entertainment, rest, fun, socialization, all of the same human things that you want. And while, yes, the cost of living might be lower in the places where our clothing is made, the minimum wages of those countries, just like here in the US, are not a living wage, which means these workers also cannot afford the things that all humans need to be happy and healthy. It's easy for people here in the global north to let themselves forget this because it is happening far away where we can't lay eyes on it. But here's where it's happening right in front of us. Retail workers. Almost 16 million people here in the US work in retail, and 64% of them do not make a living wage. Many of them are selling you fast fashion, whether it's at the mall or Target or Walmart, TJ Maxx, even Nordstrom. It's brutal physical work, and yes, it's also skilled labor. Employees are kept at less than full-time hours so that companies can avoid paying benefits like sick days and health insurance. These are people who cannot afford to live, to be healthy, and to be happy. Then there are the warehouse workers. In some ways, warehouse workers can fare better than retail workers, making about $16 to $19 an hour. That's not actually a living wage either. And their schedules can be as unpredictable as retail workers, with a lot of on-call shifts and being sent home on slower days. That happens to retail workers too. And they're missing out on benefits like sick days, health insurance, etc. Then there are the people working in the corporate offices. I worked as a buyer for most of my career, working my way up the ladder to the leadership level. I managed millions of dollars worth of business at each level of my career, and I did not make a living wage for a person with a child until I was a senior buyer at Nasty Gal many years into my career. I also had no work-life balance, my benefits were horrible, and I lived paycheck to paycheck for years after that. And I had absolutely no job security. I could lose my job just as fast as retail and warehouse workers. In fact, I'm going to tell you, I kind of felt like I had more job security when I was working in the store than I did in the corporate office. Next, there are people working in freight and shipping. The low prices of fast fashion, along with all of that so-called free shipping and returns, are pushing down the wages of truck drivers, delivery drivers, and people working for the shipping companies. We talked about this in the first episode of this series. Then there are the artists, the designers, the small brands. Fast fashion loves to steal ideas from small businesses and smaller brands and artists. And when they do that, they are stealing both customers and income from these small businesses. And yeah, this means small businesses close up shop because they can't survive. We talked about this in the last episode. Basically, fast fashion is asking us as customers to push our concerns for all of those people out of our minds. That's a lot of people, right? To forget about, to have to pretend we don't know about. Fast fashion wants us to tell ourselves that access to lots of cheap, trendy clothing is far more important than the health and happiness of people all over this world. What kind of audacity does this industry have? Ultimately, fast fashion turns us against one another. It forces us to say, I suffer, so others must suffer. It tells us, you can't have anything unless someone else is miserable, so turn off your empathy and get to shopping. Fast fashion is saying, hey, we know you're underpaid and overworked, so just treat yourself. Buying new clothes will make you feel better. Don't think about anything else. Just get that dopamine that you need because your boss doesn't pay you enough, because you're overworked and exhausted and so stressed out all the time. Here's the thing. Don't you deserve better stuff for the money you spend with these companies? We know now that clothes are kind of garbage these days thanks to a swap into cheaper fabrics and trims and lots of cut corners. They aren't made to last, which is great for fast fashion because the only way the business model works is if you're buying lots of new clothes all the time. And if the zippers are always breaking or the fabrics are pilling up after one wash, well, that's great for fast fashion because you'll be back to buy some more new clothes very, very soon. You work so hard for the money you have. Here's this industry kind of robbing you of it by forcing you into a situation where you have to buy more and more clothes. And the creation and shipping and selling of these clothes, well, it involved both present day and future human suffering. Why would you want to spend your money on that? Why does the industry force you to, if you want clothing, be complicit in a lot of really bad things? Why does it have to be that way? That's when we talk about Shein, when we talk about fast fashion, when we cast a critical eye on it and call out what's really happening there and why we want things to change, that is what we're getting down to. Why can't you have clothes and not have to be complicit in all of this terrible shit around the world. All of us, no matter where we live or what we do for a living, we are experiencing the repercussions of fast fashion right now. Microplastics in the water and in the soil and the food supply and in our bodies, water scarcity, the impact of carbon emissions, the suppression of wages, and even the emotionally corrosive nature of a steady stream of low quality, poor fitting clothing. I promise it makes your brain feel bad. The fight against the fast fashion system is a matter of class solidarity. Take class out of it even. It's a matter of human solidarity. We're fighting for everyone around us, including ourselves. And to be clear, when I say that, when I point out the problems with fast fashion and Shein, I'm not telling you that you are a bad person for buying fast fashion. I'm not even telling you that you should never, ever buy new clothes, even from Shein. What I am doing, and I hope you will be doing now, is joining the movement to change this, to make buying clothing no longer an issue of environmental, social, and economic justice, something that is so destructive that it breaks people's brains on the internet. Buying and wearing clothing should be simple. It's a human basic need. We literally need it to stay warm, protect ourselves from the sun and other elements and mosquitoes and poison ivy and all of these things. We need clothes, right? It shouldn't be a disaster to need clothes. No one should suffer for fashion. And that's what the slow fashion movement is all about, taking the suffering out of clothing. That will not happen if we don't have more people on board, buying less new stuff, shopping secondhand, spreading the word about everything we discuss here, and pushing for government regulations for the fashion industry. This is a fight, and we're in this together. Change is coming, and we're making it happen. Welcome to Clothes Horse, the podcast that, yes, is still talking about Shein. I'm your host, Amanda, and this is episode 206, part 3 in a short series I'm calling the SHEIN-sodes. If you haven't listened to the first 2 parts yet, go do that. I call back to them a lot in this episode, including even in the intro you just heard, so please start at the beginning. In this, what I hope will be the final chapter of this series for now, we're going to be talking explicitly about the human element of Shein's impact. Although one could argue, and the one arguing would in fact be me, that we've been exploring this the whole time. We'll be getting into the following: how the early days of Shein, pre-Shein really, might indicate something about Shein now, what it's like to work for Shein, Shein's connection to forced labor, and how Shein becoming the standard for making and selling clothing will impact everyone, even people who have never bought anything from the brand, even people who don't wear clothing at all. One more thing, I am once again reminding you of the Clothes Horse Jamboree. It's happening August 16th to 17th here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Tickets are now officially $300, and we will be cutting off ticket sales on 7/15, which is about a week away because we need to order food, etc. So buy your ticket now. If you can't actually pay for your ticket until after 7/15, a feeling I totally get, drop me an email ASAP so we can secure a ticket for you and figure out everything else. I really want to make this work for as many people as possible, so let's figure it out. Why is that important to me? This is a one-time thing. There will not be a Jamboree next year, so you don't want to miss this. We're going to have such a great time. This will actually be the final Clothes Horse event, virtual or IRL, this year. I'm also doing serious reevaluation of community events, which is difficult because I really love community and connecting with all of you is so important to me, and it's really what keeps me going. But after a few months and some conversations with Justin, I'm not planning on any events in the future, and that would include no more webinars or anything like that. Just the podcast, talking to y'all on social media. And while I love getting a chance to interact with you all in real time, not just via screens and chat, the workload and financial risk of it all, it's just too much for one person. Whether it's the virtual webinars or the live streaming episode or even the Jamboree, the level of work and money involved is just too much, especially now that I'm working a lot more. And the turnout, to be honest, is always like really frustratingly disappointing, which leads me to feel that the impact isn't very significant and maybe even the demand for it isn't there. I think most people would probably be surprised to hear about the amount of work required for events. I know I'm learning that firsthand that, whoa, this stuff is so much work, even the virtual ones. So I really just want to keep my clothes horse focus on the places where I know there is impact. Outreach via the podcast and social media, and the lobbying efforts for the Fashion Act. Any future events and live episodes will be part of larger events thrown by other groups, so there might be a chance to hang out IRL in the future, but not explicitly clothes horse events. Like I don't want to book things. I don't want to promote things in a really excessive way. Like I just want to be there with you all. So don't miss out on the Jamboree. Like, let's have the most fun ever. This is less than a week after my birthday, so I'm looking at hanging out with all of you as a big, fun birthday gift to myself. You can get your tickets at clotheshorsepodcast.com. Of course, I'll share all that stuff in the show notes, and I would love to see all of you there. Seriously, there's so much fun stuff planned. I just sent the Brenda cards to the printer. That is Slow Fashion Trivia Bingo. I think it's going to be so much fun. And that's just one awesome thing we're going to be doing over that 2-day period. You can learn more in the pinned post on my Instagram profile, or like I said, at clotheshorsepodcast.com. Okay, before we jump into our continued conversation about Shein, let's do our regular disclaimer. I bet you have it memorized by now. Shein's growth and impending IPO are a bad thing for everyone on this planet. We are not picking on Shein when we talk about the ethical and environmental issues related to its business model. We are not being xenophobic when we talk about Shein. This has nothing to do with Shein starting in China at all. We are not shaming people for shopping from Shein. If you are wearing Shein clothes right now, or you just placed an order, it doesn't matter because you're a part of this community and we're glad you are here. And we are so glad you're here. We're talking about Shein because its success is pushing the fashion industry to make clothing a lot faster and a lot more quasi-disposable. It is making the problem of fast fashion much, much worse. And by the way, I'm repeating this in every episode, not because I don't think you know this by now, but because I want you to get comfortable with starting all conversations with new people about Shein with this disclaimer. One thing I think about a lot is how I can model these conversations for you so you can learn from me more than just a bunch of facts and figures and sad stories, but also how to talk to people about fast fashion, because we need to be holding these conversations often. I promise they really do get easier with time. Let's take a moment to thank some of the incredible small businesses who keep Clothes Horse going via their generous Patreon support. Selena Sanders, a social impact brand that specializes in upcycled clothing using only reclaimed, vintage, or thrifted materials from tea towels, linens, blankets, and quilts. Sustainably crafted in Los Angeles, each piece is designed to last in one's closet for generations to come. Maximum style, minimal carbon footprint. Shift Clothing out of beautiful Astoria, Oregon, with a focus on natural fibers, simple hardworking designs, and putting fat people first. Discover more at shiftwheeler.com. Late to the party, creating one-of-a-kind statement clothing from vintage, salvaged, and thrifted textiles. They hope to tap into the dreamy memories we all hold. Floral curtains, a childhood dress, the wallpaper in your best friend's rec room, all while creating modern, sustainable garments that you'll love wearing and have for years to come. Late to the Party is passionate about celebrating and preserving textiles, the memories they hold, and the stories they have yet to tell. Check them out on Instagram at Late to the Party People. Vino Vintage, based just outside of LA. We love the hunt of shopping secondhand because you never know what you might find. Catch us at flea markets around Southern California by following us on Instagram at vino.vintage so you don't miss our next event. Dylan Page is an online clothing and lifestyle brand based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our products are chosen with intention for the conscious community. Everything we carry is animal-friendly, ethically made, sustainably sourced, and cruelty-free. Dylan Page is for those who never stop questioning where something comes from. We know that personal experience dictates what's sustainable for you, and we are here to help guide and support you to make choices that fit your needs. Check us out at dylanpage.com and find us on Instagram at dylanpage.life&style. Salt Hats, purveyors of truly sustainable hats, hand-blocked, sewn, and embellished in Detroit, Michigan. Find us on Instagram at Salt Hats. Gentle Vibes Vintage. We are purveyors of polyester and psychedelic relics. We encourage experimentation and play not only in your wardrobe, but in your home too. We have thousands of killer vintage pieces ready for their next adventure. See them all on Instagram at Gentle Vibes Vintage. Thumbprint is Detroit's only fair trade marketplace, located in the historic Eastern Market. Our small business specializes in products handmade by empowered women in South Africa, making a living wage, creating things they love like hand-painted candles and ceramics. We also carry a curated assortment of sustainable and natural locally made goods. Thumbprint is a great gift destination for both the special people in your life and for yourself. Browse our online store at thumbprintdetroit.com and find us on Instagram at thumbprintdetroit. Vagabond Vintage DTLV is a vintage clothing, accessories, and decor reselling business based in downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. Not only do we sell in Las Vegas, but we're also located throughout resale markets in San Francisco, as well as at a curated boutique called Lux and Ivy, located in Indianapolis, Indiana. Jessica, the founder and owner of Vagabond Vintage DTLV, recently opened the first IRL location located in the Arts District of downtown Las Vegas on August 5th. The shop has a strong emphasis on 60s and 70s garments, single-stitch tees, and dreamy loungewear. Follow them on Instagram at Vagabond Vintage DTLV and keep an eye out for their website coming fall of 2022. I've worked for some really stupid companies that have they've done some really stupid things in the name of marketing. Like, ask me about the feminist brand run by two cis white women who created a campaign that included enamel pins with statements like, "We are all Black. We are all immigrants. We are all gay." Surprise, surprise. That campaign was not well received. Wow, really? Wait, what? Seriously. Oh, anyway, my planner ended up taking like 1,000 unsold pins because we had to pull them to the scrapyard for recycling. And they had to be separated from their backs. Like, they had to go into different recycling streams or something. So she sat down and removed the backs from these like thousands of pins. Her fingers were bleeding. She was wearing Band-Aids for like a week. But she took them to be recycled. And what a bad idea, right? Just not the recycling. Thank you so much for taking those to the recycling, metal recycling facility. Like, you're a hero. But I mean, the fact that these pins existed in the first place, the fact that someone thought that this was a great marketing idea. But like I said, it's not the only really ill-advised, really stupid marketing campaign I've had to be a part of at work. And it's not the only one that's happened in the world, okay? So last June, SHEIN offered a group of influencers an all-expenses-paid trip to Guangzhou, China, to tour some of its manufacturing facilities, aka its factories. In fact, I want to be very specific here. SHEIN invited only plus size influencers and women of color on this trip. And that was definitely a calculated part of the whole thing. The reality is that plus size influencers and influencers who are not white are often paid less for partnerships. And they are offered fewer partnerships in the first place because this world sucks sometimes, okay? It's so unfair and so stupid. And especially when we're talking about fashion, it's just so focused on thin, white, young people, right? Here's the thing. No matter what you think about influencers, it is a job and everyone should be paid evenly, fairly for their work, right? And while I'm not an influencer, I can tell you that creating content is so much work. I know a lot of you small business owners who also have to create content for your business Instagram feel the same way, right? So this is work. Everyone should be paid for it, and everybody should be paid the same, right? Equally. So yeah, that's not how it works with influencers right now at all. The same issues of racism, ableism, fat phobia, all that stuff that exists within the fashion industry, quite obviously, of course, still exist in terms of how influencers are paid and the kinds of opportunities different influencers are offered. So yeah, it's no coincidence that SHEIN didn't pick thin white women for this trip. They wanted influencers who would be wowed by being treated well, by having this opportunity in the first place. And let's be real, an all expenses paid luxury trip to China, that's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And when you don't get offers like this normally, it's even more significant. So of course you're going to take it and you're going to say nice things about SHEIN, or at least, believe the narrative that SHEIN is trying to sell. According to both SHEIN and the influencers, they were neither paid for their attendance nor paid to post about it on social media. But of course, they did because this was an incredible trip. One influencer said in a video posted to SHEIN's Singapore Instagram, "It's so nice to look around the table and see women that look like me. I'm only 21, and so the fact that I have opportunities like this is crazy. I want to thank you, SHEIN, for bringing me on this phenomenal trip. China has been on my bucket list forever, y'all. So y'all are making dreams come true." By the way, I'm not naming the influencers here because they've already had to deal with enough of the internet's rage over this. Another influencer said that despite having reservations about SHEIN, her identity as a plus-size woman did influence her decision to accept this trip. One part of this trip was touring a factory in Guangzhou, where the influencers were shown a clean, brightly lit facility where workers seemed fine. One influencer said, "Upon interviewing the workers, a lot of them were really confused and taken aback with the child labor questions and the lead in the clothing questions. They weren't even sweating. We were the ones sweating." Ugh. Okay. Let's poke some holes in this factory tour. Well, one, do you really think, when I say you, I just mean the collective you, all of us, do you really think that a factory worker that was most likely chosen by SHEIN to be there that day and maybe even offered some perks or a little extra money is going to say, "Yeah, this place sucks. I work a zillion hours a week and my neck hurts from it"? No. Number two, this was one factory out of SHEIN's more than 5,000 suppliers. Number three, if you don't think this factory was cleaned up and maybe even repainted for this visit, well, I'm sure it was. And number four, even if working in this factory is awesome and the pay is good, these workers are still working long hours, handling products with unsafe levels of toxic chemicals. So, not great, right? Well, obviously the whole world was angry at these influencers. And really, that rage should have been saved for SHEIN. After all, the company planned the trip, manipulated the influencers, and most likely fabricated the entire factory to be a good PR move. Yeah, it's disappointing that the influencers were manipulated like this, but honestly, SHEIN had all of the power in this situation. And once again, there's just something about fast fashion, and SHEIN in particular, although I've seen things get really ugly in conversations about anthropology. There's just something about Shein that turns people against one another rather than against the real systems of oppression. Going back to the introduction to this episode, rather than fighting with one another about Shein, we should be fighting against the things that keep people poor and struggling. But I think our identities are just too wrapped up in brands or where we stand on issues. So it's easy to go scorched earth defending Shein's honor or telling people to go fuck themselves for shopping from Shein. So instead of working to force Shein to do better or pushing our governments to raise the minimum wage and provide universal health care and child care and increase disability benefits and fix the student loan systems, we're just fighting on the internet or sending death threats to influencers who went on a Shein trip. It's such a waste of one of life's most precious resources, time. We gotta stop wasting it. But back to the Shein trip. Well, by the summer of 2023, Shein had received a ton of bad press for issues related to its supply chain, and specifically the humans working within its supply chain. In 2021, the Swiss human rights group Public Eye interviewed 13 textile workers employed at 6 factories in Guangzhou. They released their findings in a report called Toiling Away for Shein, which I will share in the show notes. Now, Shein does not release the name of its suppliers, but Public Eye was able to determine that these 6 factories were making Shein products through both the presence of Shein products on the factory floor and the confirmation of the workers being interviewed. And what Public Eye found was dreadful, albeit probably not surprising, I guess. They found bags of clothing and rolls of fabrics that were blocking walkways, corridors, and exits. This is a huge safety issue because it makes it impossible for workers to safely and efficiently evacuate a building during a fire or a natural disaster. The researcher found no fire exits, but did see bars on the windows, making it even more dangerous. This is like some triangle shirtwaist fire kind of nonsense. Okay, this is bad. This is very bad. The workers worked from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., 75 hours each week. They had 1 day off per month. For all of you who are thinking, well, things are different in China, this is actually illegal there too. Workers are not allowed to exceed 36 hours of overtime in 1 month, and they are required to have 1 day off every week. Furthermore, these workers had no labor contract with their employers. They were paid by the piece rather than by the hour, and they were offered none of the legal protections that come with a labor contract. Overall, the wages were competitive, and workers could make a decent amount of money if they worked the long hours and took very few days off. But it's also a quality of life issue, right? And the thing is, these workers don't have an alternative. It's either work in these factories, work the long hours and give up quality of life, or have nothing. So that was 2021. The next year, in 2022, an undercover investigation from Channel 4 and the I newspaper in the UK, they found some pretty terrible stuff in factories making clothing for Shein. Workers worked 18 hours a day, getting only 1 day off per month. Employees were so overworked that they washed their hair at work to save time. There was not enough free time to do it elsewhere. Workers would be fined 2/3 of their total wages for the month for one small mistake. That's wage theft. And the workers sewing these garments made 4 cents per item with a goal of about 500 garments per day. In other words, they were paid $20 a day to work 18-hour shifts. So yeah, things still sucked at Shein. And by the way, that documentary is called Untold: Inside the Shein Machine. After the release of Inside the Shein Machine, Shein pledged to spend $15 million improving working conditions in its factories. I'm not really sure how that would work. They could add fire exits and other safety features, which they should. But the reality is that nothing will change the wages and volume of work unless Shein changes its pricing and volume of product, right? We already know that these prices are artificially low. They only work if Shein is underpaying everyone and isn't paying duties and taxes and has this whole convoluted structure that prevents people, countries, anyone from holding Shein legally responsible, right? So these prices, they just don't work without all of this terrible stuff attached to it. So just the fact that Shein was like, oh, we're going to spend this $15 million to make things better, it felt like a PR move. And speaking of PR moves, that's when Shein started talking about sustainability an awful lot. They published reports and pages on its website that spoke to a more sustainable, ethical business model. They did a greenwashy collection of clothing made of recycled polyester. They announced they were launching a resale business, and they also pledged to give the Orr Foundation $50 million over a period of 5 years to help alleviate the economic, social, and environmental crisis created by the flow of fast fashion from the global north to Accra, Ghana. In fact, that is the only good, truly positively impactful thing that they did that year. What they didn't do is make anything better for their workers. In 2023, Public Eye made another trip to Guangzhou to interview more workers in some of the Shein factories there. And they found that nothing had really changed. Remember, Shein promised in 2022 that it was going to invest $15 million in improving working conditions in its facilities. They really did not. One worker told the Public Eye researcher, I work every day from 8 in the morning to 10:30 at night, and I take off 1 day each month. I can't afford any more days off because it costs too much. Investigators found, oh man, this one's so bad. They found that the government's ban of smoking within factories was also being ignored in these facilities. They discovered lit and burning cigarettes in the stairwells and even in the entrances to the factory floors. This was a major fire risk because there were garments and fabrics stacked everywhere on the floor. Not only could a single cigarette easily start a fire amongst all of that fabric, the piles would make it difficult to evacuate the building. Wages were about the same, but with more fines for mistakes in sewing. And once again, people could make an okay living if they worked the long hours and didn't take time off. But is that okay? Because I don't think it is. I'm going to share this follow-up report from Public Eye in the show notes because it also tries to explain Shein's Byzantine corporate structure, which I discussed in last week's episode. This allows them to avoid taxes and legal repercussions, including any penalties for violating labor and safety laws. So, okay. Working in a factory making Shein stuff only works financially if you work really long hours and kind of sacrifice the rest of your life. Oh, and if there's never a fire in the factory. And we can agree that, okay, these workers do choose to be there, but they also don't have better options. So, are they really choosing? What about the people who are making stuff for Shein and literally have no choice in the matter? I'm talking about forced labor, aka slavery. In part 1 of this series, I talked about Shein's links to the forced labor of the Uyghur Muslims and how the de minimis loophole has allowed Shein to skirt compliance with the UFLPA. The UFLPA is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, passed in 2021 to prevent products manufactured using the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims into the United States. A report issued last summer by the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party indicated that there's probably a lot of forced labor happening in the factories making Shein's products. I'm primarily referring to the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims, but political dissidents and other religious groups like Tibetan Buddhists have also been forced into work camps. And yeah, that could be from the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. that's a mouthful, that could be anti-China sentiment or political grandstanding. But the reality is that Shein has very little insight into its supply chain because it is so massive. And furthermore, well, they've been caught selling products made with cotton grown in Xinjiang, where Uyghur forced labor is used to cultivate, harvest, and produce cotton. In 2022, testing conducted by Bloomberg News on 2 separate occasions was able to link the cotton and Shein products to Xinjiang cotton. From that investigation, quote, labor activists, human rights groups, and others have expressed concern that the retailer was using cotton grown in Xinjiang, but Bloomberg's testing provides the first public evidence on the matter. 2 batches of garments from Shein, one ordered in March and a second in July, were shipped to a laboratory in Germany for analysis. The clothes were chosen from about 60,000 items, oh my God, that turned up in a search for cotton on the retailer's US website. So the long, very scientific story short, and you can read the whole thing, you'll find the link in the show notes. Bloomberg hired a company called AgroIsoLab to use stable isotope analysis to determine the origins of the cotton fibers in these Shein garments. This type of testing, and this explanation comes from that investigation, measures variations in the isotopes of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen present in the cotton's fibers to indicate the altitude and other climate characteristics of the region where it was grown. Shein's garments were tested alongside some cotton items that were confirmed to originate in the Xinjiang region. The tests indicated that Shein's cotton items originated in Xinjiang as well. And hilariously, one garment that was sold as cotton on the Shein website actually turned out to be polyester. That made me laugh. The rest of this is very sad, but okay, great. So we can't even read the website and the labels to know what we're really getting. That makes me angry. So yeah, there is proof there despite Shein's assertions otherwise. And the thing is, yes, for all of you whataboutism, Shein is not the only brand that has been busted for using Uyghur forced labor. Nike, Uniqlo, the list goes on and on. But what's different about these brands is that anything they ship into the US is inspected by customs, and anything potentially linked to forced labor is pooled and investigated. Shein doesn't face that kind of inspection because of the de minimis rule. And I want to be clear, other companies have had their shipments caught by customs. Uniqlo is the one that comes top to mind for suspicions of forced labor being involved in the production of the items in that shipment. But it's not just the forced labor of the Uyghur Muslims. It's also potentially the forced labor of North Koreans who are sort of like exported to China as like human money makers, I guess. According to the U.S. State Department, there are currently over 100,000 North Koreans working in China under forced labor at construction companies, textile factories, software firms, and seafood processing plants. I read this incredible, it's very long, worth to read, New Yorker piece from earlier this year called Inside North Korea's Forced Labor Program. And I gotta tell you, it is devastating. I actually got tears in my eyes reading it. From that piece, many companies in China rely on a vast program of forced labor from North Korea. The program is run by various entities in the North Korean government, including a secretive agency called Room 39, which oversees activities such as money laundering and cyber attacks, and which funds the country's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Such labor transfers are not new. In 2012, North Korea sent some 40,000 workers to China. A portion of their salaries were taken by the state, providing a vital source of foreign currency for party officials. At the time, a Seoul-based think tank estimated that the country made as much as $2.3 billion a year through the program. Since then, North Koreans have been sent to Russia, Poland, Qatar, Uruguay, and Mali. So, yeah, this is like a big moneymaker for the North Korean government. And of course, it funds all sorts of terrible things. It doesn't actually help anyone. Not that that would make it okay anyway. Forced labor is forced labor, right? Some workers were very secretly interviewed by the New Yorker, and they were all women, and they were held captive, watched 24/7. They experienced physical and sexual violence, and they are trapped. Remco Breuker, a North Korea specialist at Leiden University in the Netherlands, told the New Yorker, hundreds of thousands of North Korean workers have for decades slaved away in China and elsewhere, enriching their leader and his party while facing unconscionable abuse. It is illegal to import products made with North Korean labor into the United States. But once again, with murky supply chains and the de minimis loophole, it is impossible to know if Shein product utilizes it. But for certain, there are textile products being made with North Korean forced labor. Customs might catch this on a shipment from a big retailer, as they have, like the example I gave you with Uniqlo, but they can't even look for it in those individual Shein packages, which just pass through. Obviously, so much of Shein is hidden, with lots of much louder PR and marketing stories to distract and confuse us as customers, onlookers, and, concerned citizens. And it's just so hard to get a feel for what it's like to work for that company, especially overseas. I did find some Glassdoor reviews. Once again, Glassdoor is a site where employees can anonymously share their experiences working for companies. I think it is an invaluable resource for future employees and customers alike. I'm always checking them out before I make a purchase, apply for a job, or consider a partnership. And because I've been studying Glassdoor reviews for a really long time now, I can do a good job of sussing out real reviews from fake reviews. And one thing that every toxic company does is force employees to write fake positive reviews to offset bad reviews. Like reviews that are like, I can't think of anything bad about Shein. I can't think of anything bad about working here. This is the best job and company that exists in the world. Like they're always very, very transparent. Unsurprisingly, I was seeing some of that in these Shein Glassdoor reviews. But I was also seeing a lot of things repeated over and over again that aligned with what I was reading in all of those investigations of the working conditions in Shein factories. A lot of these reviews did not share job titles or locations. I would assume that the majority come from workers here in the US, most likely in LA. And they really paint a picture of a company culture that is kind of rotten from top to bottom, no matter where within the company you work. Here are some examples. The culture is, how to put it correctly, authoritarian. Everybody's expected to work for the greater good and ask no questions. The work culture in China translates over to their American offices. You could easily be working 12 to 16-hour days since that's their expectation of you. Other than that, there are some serious moral and ethical issues to face with the company being in the news every week for another lawsuit filing or being accused of evading import taxes. Overworked. Be prepared for overtime, nightly meetings, plus hours of driving depending on where you live. Even on vacations, it is nonstop work calls and no work boundaries. You are pushed to work 11 hours per day. No work-life balance, poor leadership, inconsistent values, and behaviors. After a while, management decided that some should not be paid by the hour, but by each piece processed, which tanked the pay of others who could not work at an unreasonable pace. Very unprofessional that the lunch tables are used as desks. Man, this reminds me too much of the worst job I ever had, the feminist company. Yes, people should get real desks, seriously. It's indicative of like a larger disregard for employees. If you ever decide to work for Shein, just remember not everybody will be welcomed here on your first day because so many people come in and out here. It feels very temporary to stay in a toxic, stressful environment. This company will not respect you. This company will not help you. This company will not let you have any sort of accommodation for the long days and long weekends that they require you to work without warning. This company will fire you for complaining. This company will fire you for saying anything against China online. This company will fire you for even taking a glimpse of the time on your phone. Do not work here unless you know what you're getting into. They are very exploitative and change the rules all the time. Does any of this surprise me? Of course not. Because here's what I've learned in my career and after 4 years of making Clothes Horse. Where there's ethical and sustainable smoke, there's an ethical and sustainable raging inferno of a fire. If you're treating your corporate workers terribly, you're also treating your garment workers terribly. Same for retail workers, warehouse staff, etc. If you're treating people poorly, you're also operating with impunity when it comes to environmental impact. And if you don't care about your workers and the planet, you also really don't care about your customers, so you're selling them garbage. No one wins with bad business except for those at the very top. If you're enjoying this episode, then this is a great time to remind you that my work here at Clothes Horse is made possible by the support of listeners like you, just like NPR, and these great small businesses. Please go give them your support. Blank Cass, or Blanket Coats by Cass, is focused on restoring, renewing, and reviving the history held within vintage and heirloom textiles. By embodying the love, craft, and energy that is original to each vintage textile as I transfer it into a new garment, I hope we can reteach ourselves to care for and mend what we have and make it last. Blank Cass lives on Instagram at _Cass, and a website will be launched soon at blankcass.com. Located in Whistler, Canada, Velvet Underground is a velvet jungle full of vintage and secondhand clothing, plants, a vegan cafe, and lots of rad products from other small sustainable businesses. Our mission is to create a brand and community dedicated to promoting self-expression, as well as educating and inspiring a more sustainable and conscious lifestyle, both for the people and the planet. Find us on Instagram at shop_Velvet Underground or online at www.shopvelvetunderground.com. St. Evens is a New York City-based vintage shop that is dedicated to bringing you those special pieces you'll reach for again and again. More than just a store, St. Evens is dedicated to sharing the stories and history behind the garments. 10% of all sales are donated to a different charitable organization each month. New vintage is released every Thursday at wearstevens.com with previews of new pieces and more, brought to you on Instagram at wear_st.evens. That's Where St. Evens. Country Feedback is a mom and pop record shop in Tarboro, North Carolina. They specialize in used rock, country, and soul and offer affordable vintage clothing and housewares. Do you have used records you want to sell? Country Feedback wants to buy them. Find us on Instagram at Country Feedback Vintage and Vinyl, or head down east and visit our brick and mortar. All are welcome at this inclusive and family-friendly record shop in the country. Republica Unicornia Yarns, handmade yarn and notions for the color obsessed, made with love and some swearing in fabulous Atlanta, Georgia by head yarn wench Kathleen. Get ready for rainbows with a side of giving a damn. Republica Unicornia is all about making your own magic using small batch, responsibly sourced, hand-dyed yarns and thoughtfully made notions. Slow fashion all the way down and discover the joy of creating your very own beautiful hand-knit, crocheted, or woven pieces. Find us on Instagram at Republica_Unicornia_yarns and at www.republicaunicornia.com. Picnic Wear, a slow fashion brand at ethically made by hand from vintage and dead stock materials, most notably vintage towels. Founder Danny has worked in the industry as a fashion designer for over 10 years, but started picnic wear in response to her dissatisfaction with the industry's shortcomings. Picnic wear recently moved to rural North Carolina, where all their sewing and accessories are now designed and cut, but the majority of their sewing is done by skilled garment workers in New York City. Their customers take comfort in knowing that all their sewists are paid well above New York City minimum wage. Picnic wear offers minimal waste and maximum authenticity. Future vintage over future garbage. Cute Little Ruin is an online shop dedicated to providing quality vintage and secondhand clothing, vinyl, and home items in a wide range of styles and price points. If it's ethical and legal, we try to find a home for it. Vintage style with progressive values. Find us on Instagram at Cute Little Ruin. Is there a little bit of Italy in your soul? Are you an enthusiast of pre-loved decor and accessories? Bring vintage Italian style and history into your space with the Pewter Thimble. We source useful and beautiful things and mend them where needed. We also find gorgeous illustrations and make them print-worthy. Tarot cards, tea towels, and hand-picked treasures available to you from the comfort of your own home. Responsibly sourced from across Rome, lovingly renewed by fairly paid artists and artisans, with something for every budget. Discover more at thepewterthimble.com. Deco Denim is a startup based out of San Francisco, and it sells clothing and accessories that are sustainable, gender fluid, size inclusive, and high quality, made to last for years to come. Deco Denim is trying to change the way you think about buying clothes. Founder Sarah Mattis wants to empower people to ask important questions like, where was this made? Was this garment made ethically? Is this fabric made of plastic? Can this garment be upcycled? And if not, can it be recycled? Sign up at decodenim.com to receive $20 off your first purchase. They promise not to spam you and send out no more than 3 emails a month, with 2 of them surrounding education or a personal note from the founder. Again, that's decodenim.com. Something I think about often is, how do the people at the tops of these big companies feel okay with knowing that their profits are built from the hardships of so many people? Like, what does it feel like to know that, but still do nothing to change it? I always come back to the same answer, which is, well, maybe they don't know what it's like to struggle, to have no choice but to work 75 hours a week just to get by. Because these people were born into money. I would think that a lot when I was working in the stores for Urban Outfitters. The founder of the company comes from money, has always been a millionaire and then a billionaire, and certainly he does not know what it's like to make $1 more than minimum wage and live off of 25-cent bagels and oranges because you can't afford anything else. I'm sure he doesn't know what it's like to have to get inspected every time you leave the store. Having your bag searched, pulling up the cuffs of your pants, pulling out your pockets in front of customers and coworkers alike. Of course, him not knowing this stuff doesn't make it okay, right, to underpay and exploit workers. But you have to assume that all of these leaders, they are doing tremendous mental gymnastics to make themselves feel okay about what they're doing, because they don't know what they're doing, I guess. But with the founder of SHEIN, Chris Zhu, that logic might not work. In 2022, Wired published an epic long piece called Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control: Inside SHEIN's Sudden Rise. It's another long read. I'm sharing a lot of long reads with you this week, but this one is really well worth it as well. There's one little story in there that has stuck with me since the first time I read it, and I periodically reread it just to remind me of what SHEIN began as and kind of who's running this company. Basically, Chris Zhu, the founder of SHEIN, started a company with 2 other guys in 2008. The goal was to build an e-commerce brand. One of those men, Li Peng, spoke to Fast Company about that business. Per the article, they began sending buyers to a wholesale clothing market to purchase individual samples of clothing from various vendors. Then they listed these products online using all kinds of different domain names and published basic English language posts on blogging platforms such as WordPress and Tumblr to improve SEO. Only when an item began selling did they place a small bulk order with a given wholesaler. And this sounds so Shein-ish, right? Like, of course, this is how it began. Lee told Fast Company that Zhu worked very long hours, working well after everyone else had gone home for the day. He strongly wished to succeed, Lee said. It would be 10 p.m. and he would be nagging me and buying me late night street food and asking more. And then it could end at 1 or 2 a.m. Zhu didn't talk about himself very much, but he did share that he had grown up poor and he was still struggling. So this is not a guy who had the silver spoon in his mouth and didn't know what it was like to struggle. You know, this is a guy who knows. He knows what he's doing. More about the way that business worked from Fast Company. I find this so fascinating. Lee remembers that early on, the average order size they received was small, around $14, but they sold 100 to 200 items a day. On a good day, they might surpass 1,000 items. The clothing was cheap, and that was the point. We were going for low margins and large quantities, Lee said. Plus, he added, the low prices kept expectations about the quality down. Pretty interesting, right? And one thing I have suspected all along is that Shein, once again, these artificially low prices, they push them down even more. They're thinking about profit margin in a different way than retailers, like Zara or Urban Outfitters or what have you. They are saying, okay, we're going to make less off of every unit we sell, but that's okay. We'll still make billions in revenue every year because we're going to sell so much. We're going to sell way more than these companies that are selling things with a higher markup. And it will actually surpass them in terms of profitability because of that. So if you only make 10 cents off of everything you sell, well, if you sell 1 million units, you got a chunk of change there, right? And this is what Shein is doing. Another way in which their prices are artificially low. Anyway, after the business had been running for more than a year, Zhu's partners came into the office and noticed that all of the passwords had been changed. And he wasn't there. He didn't respond to texts. He was the only one who had access to the company's PayPal account, which is where all the sale money went. And later they learned that he had just kind of ghosted them. He let go of all of the employees and he started his own company, SHEIN-sodes, the precursor to Shein. I'm telling you this because this shows a leader whose focus is growth and success over everything else, including people. And that's just scary to me. So what happens as Shein grows and grows? Well, by mid-2021, every investor out there wanted to know, what is the next Shein and how can I get on this train? Matthew Brennan, a China-based tech expert who has spent a lot of time researching and writing about Shein, told Business of Fashion in 2021, everyone in China has been looking at Shein and trying to dig out things to copy. All of the pieces of the puzzle to the business have already been out there, but no one has executed them as well as Shein. And this 2021 is when we start to see more and more brands popping up, practically an infinite list at this point, offering factory direct product. And these factories are kind of selling everywhere on Amazon, Temu, Etsy, Cider, AliExpress, Shein, and so much more. It's sort of a renaissance of connecting customers with Chinese factories. And I'll tell you, one of the things I see often in conversations about Shein or Temu on social media, in the comments sections, is people saying, well, Amazon's selling the same stuff as Shein and Temu, but marking up the prices higher. Or I see it on Etsy and it's just marked up higher. I'm going to tell you, all of those items, they're being made and sold by the same factories. They might be pricing them higher on Amazon or Etsy because they know customers will pay more, or that they are being charged higher fees by those platforms that they need to make up by charging higher prices. But Shein and Etsy, these platforms aren't buying that stuff and then reselling it. It's being shipped directly from those factories. It's being sold by those factories who are creating marketplace accounts and selling on those platforms. It's really important to remember that a substantial chunk of the things that you can buy on Amazon are not bought and warehoused by Amazon. They are being sold by these third-party sellers, right? More and more and more. That's one of the reasons Amazon is just like rife with counterfeits and weird quality and things that don't line up from like a brand perspective. That's where the stuff is coming from. In fact, I was talking to one of my clients and she feels pressured to sell on Amazon so that these like knockoff factory third-party sellers can't sell copies of her stuff on Amazon. And yeah, that sucks. But I want to be clear, like, not a fan of Amazon at all, obviously, but like, I think that people will sometimes, because we're looking for ways to make ourselves feel better about how hard it is. I don't know, it's just so hard to do things right in our lives because these systems exist. One of the like arguments I'll see is like, well, Amazon's worse because they sell the same stuff and mark it up. And it's like, actually, it's all the same stuff. It's coming from the same places. And really what we need to stop the flow of that stuff is stop buying it from anywhere, right? And we're also seeing more brands popping up that operate in the same way as Shein. Because once again, it's at this point, it's easy to get investment in a company that follows the Shein model because that's where investors see profitability, right? So a lot more of these brands have popped up that operate in the same way as Shein, factory direct, low visibility into their supply chains, skirting import taxes, and they're also portraying themselves as more high-end than Shein. Cider is a great example. Quince, I don't know if you've heard of that one. It's so odd. I went to a thrift store another county over in pursuit of faux fruit in Lebanon, and there was so much stuff from Quince there, like in the clothing section, in the home goods section. They had curtain rods and bedding and any kind of linens you would need for home, but then lots of clothing too. And my suspicion is that it was dumped there by the company because I'm talking hundreds of pieces of things. It wasn't like when you go thrifting and there's like a Shein thing here and a Shein thing there. It was like the same stuff. So it came all together. So Quince is another one who also, I get nervous about talking to them because they're basically bullying Alden Wicker for speaking out against their sustainability claims. And they sent her a really mean, scary lawyer letter about it. But yeah, this is a thing that's happening. More and more brands, and they're kind of like changing up the way it looks to make it seem different. But it's just Shein with different branding. Shein is on its way to becoming the model for making and selling clothing. Much like the original incarnation of fast fashion, Zara, H&M, Forever 21 became the model for making and selling just about everything, not even just clothes, over the past 15 years. So what will this change, this Sheinification of everything, look like? Well, for one, retailers here in the US, the UK, Canada, everywhere, they can't really compete with those prices. After all, they have the expenses of customs, duties, taxes, warehouses, and staff. So the Shein era is definitely going to drive a bunch of brands out of business. And am I crying over the potential loss of Forever 21, who, by the way, is now partnering with Shein, and you can buy Forever 21 clothes on the Shein website? No. And interestingly enough, the most expensive clothes on the Shein website seem to be from Forever 21. If that doesn't tell you about how ridiculous the prices on Shein are, I don't know what will. I'm not crying over the loss of Forever 21 or Zara or H&M or Urban Outfitters or any of these brands, but the reality is that people will lose their jobs. A lot of people will lose their jobs. And I want to assure you that these brands will not go down without a fight. And where they will start is by lowering their prices. And they'll get there by cutting their costs, as they always have. They'll be laying people off, getting rid of more expensive employees so they can hire new ones for less money. They're going to push factories for even lower pricing, putting garment workers in an even more terrible position. And they're generally going to be creating even lower quality goods. Because if there's one thing that Shein has proved, which seems like it was baked into the DNA from moment one with that first business that Chris Zhu started, is that if stuff is so cheap, there's some sweet spot where it's just cheap enough, people don't care if it doesn't last or fit well or feel good to wear. I mean, Forever 21, I guess, proved that for a long time too. Companies are going to keep pushing that envelope. Where's the tipping point where it's so cheap that you don't care what you receive? To get down to brass tacks, the ripple effects of Shein's growth are bad for everyone, everywhere. We're talking about more low-quality clothes entering the landfill even faster. We're talking about clothing production never returning to the U.S. in a major way, and the clothing that is made here will still be made under shady circumstances. We're talking about all of us spending more money more often to replace our clothing because it's low quality. Think about how much we have had to lower our expectations for clothing in the last decade. Imagine it even worse, because retailers can't offer Shein pricing with the current quality while still having warehouses and stores. What else? More and more synthetic fabrics, because they are cheaper, shedding microplastics. Wages for warehouse workers, retail staff, and even corporate staff being suppressed even more, so it becomes even harder to make a living with these jobs. Then there's the destruction of small businesses via intellectual property theft and not being able to keep up with those low prices. As you all know by now, how I really make my living is by working with small brands and micro businesses. And I also teach classes here and there to small business owners. And one thing we talk about a lot is the power of perceived value. Perceived value is not how much it costs to create something. It's how much your customers are willing to pay for something. And perceived value is influenced by the price of everything else out there. So when people can go to Shein and buy a dress for $2.20, unless your price is very close to that, it's really hard to get people to pay those prices, right? So if you are a maker, right, and you are sewing this stuff, it's bespoke, made for the person in their sizes, you know, you're checking all the boxes in terms of sustainability and ethics, and the price comes out to $200 or even $58, let's say, people look at that and they're like, sorry, that's too expensive. I can go get like 100 dresses from Shein for that price. What happens is that you go out of business unless we retrain our perception of value, right? Like I always say that like fast fashion destroyed our concept of value and pricing. Like we think things should be really cheap and we should have a lot of it, not pay a higher price and have less of it, right? It's really, really broken. Shein is pushing that to the next level, and that will destroy so many small businesses. And like I said last week, if Shein is selling dresses for $2.20, you're not even going to pay $10 for a secondhand dress if you can get a brand new one for $2.20. Like this is very, very bad across our economy. And here's the other thing. When wages in one industry are suppressed, it carries over into every other industry. If you don't think what Amazon workers are paid affects what you're paid, you're wrong. These big companies set the standard for pay and benefits. So when they have to pay less to keep up with Shein's artificial pricing, we will all be paid less no matter where we work. All of us. And this is scary, right? Like it almost feels unfair. How do we as individuals change what's happening? It just feels too big, right? Well, there are many things we can do actually. And some are easier than others. Some are related to clothing and others are related to clothing in no way at all, at least on an obvious level, but actually are. First things first, you know what I'm going to tell you. Change your habits. We shop for a lot of different reasons, and most of them have nothing to do with actual need. It's important to get to know yourself and why and how you shop. Retail therapy, as I always say, is not therapy. And that means even if we do need to buy stuff from Shein because it's what we can afford and what is available in our sizes, we buy only what we need. We skip the haul mentality and we really think through what we are going to buy by asking, 1, why am I buying this? Is it a need, a want, or an add-on to get to the free shipping threshold? Can I wear it often? Will I wear it often? Is it hyper trendy or does it seem to have longevity in my life? Does it play well with my other clothes? Am I going to have to buy other stuff to make this work? Specific undergarments, shoes, etc. And am I prepared to care for this properly? I always say the most sustainable thing any of us can do, and we can all do this, no matter how much money we have, what size we are, where we live, any circumstances in our life, is buy less new stuff. And one way we do that is by making it last longer. This includes learning to mend or paying others to mend and repair our wardrobe. It's about doing laundry carefully, and it's making thoughtful decisions about what we decide to buy. Next is being a proud outfit repeater. We need to dismantle the expectation that we have to wear a new outfit for every event and Instagram photo. We definitely don't need a new wardrobe for our vacation either. Shein and all of the other fast fashion brands thrive on this misconception that we shouldn't be seen in an outfit more than once, that we can't wear the same dress to every wedding we attend this year, that we need special clothes for our vacation. Psst, here's a pro tip. If you're going on vacation to a different climate and you need super lightweight clothing or a big puffy coat and sweaters, rent them or borrow them from a friend if possible. You don't want more stuff that you have to spend all your money on, that lives in your closet, that you never wear because you needed it because you went to Iceland or something. Next, adopt a secondhand first approach, meaning opting for secondhand as often as possible. It won't be every time, but most of the time, or even part of the time, that's a big help. Next, we get out there and we vote. We call our elected representatives and we tell them that we want legislation that regulates fast fashion. We tell them that we want, here in the United States, the de minimis loophole tightened so Shein and its peers are subject to customs inspection and import taxes. We support legislation like the Fashion Act by signing petitions and telling others about it and sharing information. You know what? That's the really important part that all of us can do. Talk to other people. One of the most effective things we can do to change anything, including the impact of fast fashion, is talking to others and sharing our personal stories. And that can mean a wide range of approaches. You can talk about your own experiences buying stuff from Shein or other fast fashion brands and why it was disappointing, how it made you feel, why you don't buy it now. Or why you're buying less new clothing in general, how you're making different decisions about shopping, why you're getting into secondhand or mending or getting really good at laundry. Be honest about your eco-anxiety and why that is motivating you to make a change. If you've worked in retail or a warehouse or in any company related to fashion, share your stories with others. Let's dismantle the patina of glamour and glitter that disguises the true ugliness of all of the waste and exploitation. Let's make it personal. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, I'm a very sensitive person, all right? And I'm also a people pleaser. It's a dangerous combination. Someone left a bad Apple review for Clothes Horse a few weeks ago. And you know what? It made me really sad for a while. It was really hurtful. That's also the intention of a bad review, to be heard and have an impact on the maker of whatever the review is about. Otherwise, in the case of a podcast, They just wouldn't listen again. So it's like you're going the extra step, especially if you listen to this podcast and I say, hey, one way you can show your support is by leaving a rating and review, right? Because it's like gets more people to come and listen. So when you leave a bad review, you want a negative outcome, right? This review said, way too many digressions about personal life that very only tangibly relate back to the topic. Not for me, but understand why it's for others. Still listening for the fashion tidbits, truly tidbits. Well, I'm sorry that listener does not feel that they are getting enough fashion information from Clothes Source. The 20 to 30 page script of research that I write each week would indicate otherwise, but maybe that's not the kind of information this person wants. In fact, Julie, if you are still listening, as you said you would be in your review, send me an email and I can send you a list of podcasts that I think are going to be more what you're looking for, like information about the fashion industry. You can find my email address in the show notes. Anyway, the thing about the personal life stuff, that's not going away. In fact, that is a very strategic decision that I have intentionally made after so much reading and research about how to be an effective activist and how to bring people into a grassroots movement and how to build a community. You have to share yourself. You have to be vulnerable and real. Yes, that is super scary and uncomfortable for me even now as a person who has always felt the best thing I could do for myself was actually never talk about myself or say what I was really feeling. The reality, though, is that authenticity and vulnerability help people see why they should get involved. Personal connection, that emotional connection, is imperative when we are asking people to not only change their habits and do all the work of making change, but also be motivated to get others involved too. So share your stories with others, like I do with all of you. This is not a news program. I do not see myself as a journalist, although sharing only factual, accurate information with all of you is a major priority. I am an activist. I am a community builder. And I am a human on this planet with all of you who just wants things to be better for everyone who exists now and in the future. That's why I do this work. And that's why I do it the way I choose to do it. And I'm going to tell you, being personal, being real with the people in your life is like a gazillion times more impactful than coming at them with like a bunch of facts and figures. It just doesn't work. It overwhelms people. It depresses them. It makes them feel guilty. It makes them shut down. But sharing your true experiences and thoughts, that's where it resonates. That's where change begins. And related to that is leading by example. We are going to show others what the slow fashion way of life is on social media and IRL. Because listen, fast fashion sells us some pretty appealing ideas. Fitting in, being our best, feeling better, impressing others. This false promise that something new will make everything better for us. We're coming up against a lot when we try to tell people that maybe they should pass on Shein. So show people that you are having a great life, because you are. Brag about your secondhand finds, the things you just repaired, your laundry triumphs, the ways you're getting plastic out of your life, or doing things that make you way happier than shopping ever has. I've said it many, many times before, and I'll say it again. One person can't make a difference alone. But when all of us are talking about fast fashion and changing our habits and pushing for laws around this stuff, we will make a serious change. This week marks 4 years since the first episode of Clothes Source was released out into the world. And while progress has felt slow sometimes, I can also see the results of our work. So let's keep doing what we're doing. And that includes talking to others about Shein. Thanks for listening to another episode of Closed Source, written, researched, hosted, all the things by me, Amanda Lee McCarty. Of course, I would love if you would leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you listen to this show. And you can, of course, subscribe. All of these things are really great and they boost Closed Source in the algorithm, whatever that means. If you liked what you're hearing, of course, please tell a friend. Let's get more people to know what we're talking about. Let's keep building this community. If you'd like to support my work financially, there are many ways you can do that. You can learn more at patreon.com/closehorsepodcast. You can subscribe to the Apple Premium subscription where you'll get access to the full archives of Closed Horse. You can also just buy me a Ko-fi using the link in the show notes, or you can find at the website closehorsepodcast.com. If you or someone you love have feelings about Shein, I want to hear your stories, buying from them in the past, why you do or do not now, how it could be better, how it could be worse, how it makes you feel. Please send them my way. My email is amanda@closehorse.world. You find that in the show notes as well. You can write that all out in an email, or you can send me a little audio message that you've recorded with your phone. But I want to hear from all of you about where you are with Shein. This is a shame-free zone. So if you're wearing Shein while you're recording it, I don't care, right? This is a larger, more complicated conversation than just Shein bad, not Shein good, right? So send your thoughts my way. All right, that's all for now. One thing I just want to add is that episodes for the rest of the summer could be a little sporadic because it is really, really hard to record when it's very hot outside. I can't have air conditioning or anything like that. Right now it's in the high 90s and I'm practically seeing mirages at this point. So I have decided going forward, because this kind of heat can be like a migraine trigger for me, that I'm only going to record on days where it's not unreasonably hot. So there could be other missed weeks of the show as we go through summer, or then again, maybe not. Last thing, thanks as always to Justin Travis White for our music and audio support. And hopefully the weather holds, or well, no, I don't want the current weather to hold. If the weather gets better, there you go. You'll hear from me next week. Bye.